The gaming community has a very conflicted opinion on the game Yooka Laylee, a crowd-funded game that there was actually a lot of hype around because it was supposed to be a Banjo-Kazooie-like game. In essence, the closest thing we're going to get to a Banjo-Kazooie 3. But the game released on consoles and PC with a lot of issues, and a lot of people were really disappointed in it. But for the handheld community, there was hope when the developers were fixing the console game and announced a Nintendo Switch version of the game. Now that we finally have it, we can dive in and take a look to see how this version goes. Here is my review of Yooka Laylee for the Nintendo Switch. The premise of Yooka Laylee is basically that a bee in business known as Capital B is aiming to steal all of the books in the world, looking for a very specific magical book whose golden pages can rewrite history in whatever way the writer sees fit. Once it is stolen and all of the pages escape, magically sealing themselves inside book worlds, the original owners of the book, a lizard named Yooka and a bat named Laylee, head into Capital B's office building and venture into all of these book worlds to be able to recollect all of the pages and reclaim their book. Now this is a decent setup for the game, but the main plot isn't the greatest part about the game's story. The really enjoyable part of the plot is all of the little dialogue sequences that Yooka and Laylee have with NPCs around each world. There's a lot of humor and a lot of references to various things like crowdfunding, breaking the third wall, and especially the couple appearances we get from famed indie game character Shovel Knight. As a project meant to mimic the Banjo-Kazooie games, Yooka Laylee is a 3D platformer with combat elements, puzzle elements, and a heavy collectible system. But before we talk about the game itself, let's talk about this version of the game. When Yooka Laylee launched on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC, it was a buggy, flawed mess. So much of the game was just wrong. The Nintendo Switch version has all of the patches that the previous versions have gotten, so the voices have been fixed, the camera controls are significantly better, the frame rate is smoother, and it's all around a more optimized game. Not to mention that the developers spent a very long time optimizing the game for the Nintendo Switch itself. Now the basic premise of the game is you've got this hub world full of book worlds that you can unlock and enter. You've got to gain collectibles to unlock each book world, and you've got to go into the world to get more collectibles by solving puzzles so that you can expand the world to unlock even more collectibles, and unlock the further parts of the hub world, working your way towards the final boss. If you've ever played Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, the progression is exactly like those games were. And on the idea of mimicking those old games, that is one thing Yooka Laylee does really, really well. From the moment I played the game to the moment I beat the final boss, every moment, from the level design, the colorful enemies, the music, the various movesets that you can unlock, it all felt like I jumped back 19 years in time, playing Banjo-Kazooie all over again, but with more modern controls. Now, since we are talking about a Nintendo Switch 3D platformer, I will say that, like the 90s platformers, you have to work for all of your rewards. The recent release Super Mario Odyssey was a very easy platformer. You got Power Moons practically just for walking on the main path. Unlike that game, there is a puzzle behind every single page that you have to collect to unlock new worlds. You might have to do a race with an NPC, or go through a difficult platforming segment, or fight a boss fight, but every single page that you unlock has some sort of challenge behind it. And that also ties into length, which was one of the biggest worries I had when diving into the game. Banjo-Kazooie was around 20 hours or so, and it had 9 to 10 worlds. Yooka Laylee only has 5 worlds, so jumping in, I was worried that this was only going to be a few hours long. Thankfully, I was wrong. While you can dive through and unlock enough to get into all 5 worlds in about 8 to 10 hours, the game's final boss is hidden behind a door that requires you to collect 100 of the 145 pages in the game, so there's a lot of encouragement to backtrack and explore. And with all of that exploration in mind, it took me around 18 hours before I was able to unlock the final boss, and well into my 20th hour before I actually managed to defeat them. That puts its length right around the same as the original Banjo-Kazooie, despite the fact that there are only 5 worlds. Now, it's not all good. There is one major thing that I have a huge problem with, and that is the game's camera. Before you say anything, yes, I know that the game's camera used to be so much worse and has gotten a lot of improvements over the months. But the game's camera is a huge hindrance. It will get stuck on objects in the environments very, very often, and it will just kind of lock in place, removing your field of view, and it just makes a lot of the platforming segments very, very frustrating. I'll recognize that it has improved a lot since its original console launch, but it's still got quite a ways to go. Now, let's talk about presentation. Graphically, the game looks really nice. When you got your Switch docked, everything looks pretty much flawless. I never saw a single jagged edge as I played through the game. In handheld mode, there are a few occasional jagged edges, but overall, it looks very colorful and it just looks really polished. And the same can be said about performance for the most part. The frame rate on the Switch stays a mostly steady 30 frames per second. Now, I'm not going to say there are no frame drops because there are a few here and there. Maybe once an hour or once every 2 hours, I would get to a point where the frames would drop and freeze for a second and then go back to gameplay. It's not a huge problem, but it's there. And now let's talk about battery life. With all the optimization put into this game, you really can tell a difference when you take a look at the battery life of this game being a big 3D game versus 3D games like Mario Odyssey or Zelda. Here are my times from 100% to 0%. Maximum brightness of the Wi-Fi on, 3 hours and 15 minutes. Maximum brightness of the Wi-Fi off, 3 hours and 18 minutes. Lower brightness of the Wi-Fi on, 3 hours and 23 minutes. And lower brightness of the Wi-Fi off, 3 hours and 52 minutes. This is more than I was expecting to get, so out of each charge you're going to get a good 3 to 4 hours out of the game. That's really not bad at all considering what kind of game this is. In conclusion, Yooka Laylee is definitely the most optimized on the Switch than it has been anywhere else. Although there are some small frame dips and the camera remains a nuisance despite the patches, there's a good Banjo-Kazooie inspired platformer here for fans of the genre looking for a colorful adventure on the go. Reviews to Go rates Yooka Laylee for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you'd like to comment on this further, feel free to below or head to the website at www.reviewstogo.com.